91 victories, 7 world championships, 68 pole positions, 155 podiums, and one number with no name at all. He is the only driver in the history of Formula One ever erased from a world championship by the men who govern the sport, because what he did that afternoon fit no rule they had ever needed to write. In August of 1998, in the rain at Spa, a Ferrari came back to the pits on 3 wheels, and its driver went looking for the man he blamed, marching down the pit lane, past his own mechanics, shouting that his rival had tried to kill him. The rival wrote every word of it down. So who is Michael Schumacher, and why do the men who raced against him, champions themselves, hard men from the hardest era of the sport, still talk about him the way survivors talk about a storm? That is exactly what we are here to find out. It begins at a go-kart track in Kerpen, Germany, where the fastest driver of his age learned to win with nothing. Michael Schumacher was born in 1969 and grew up around the kart circuit in Kerpen, where his father worked. There was no family fortune and no famous name behind him, only track time, and the boy converted every minute of it into something measurable. What money could not buy, precision would have to replace, and precision became his native language. He collected national and European karting titles as a teenager, funded by scrap parts and other people's discarded tires, and worked his way up through the junior single-seater ladder with a reputation for something genuinely unusual. He did not have bad days. His worst afternoons looked like other men's best ones. Then came the last weekend of August 1991. A one-race stand-in with the small Jordan team at Spa, the longest and most demanding circuit on the calendar, a track he had never raced in his life. The unknown German qualified 7th, ahead of drivers with hundreds of Grand Prix between them, in a car that had no business being that far up the grid. The paddock went quiet the way a room goes quiet when everyone understands the same thing at the same moment. Benetton had him under contract before the next race began, and the argument over who owned his future nearly ended in court, because the sharpest men in the sport had needed exactly one Saturday to see what was coming. 1 year later, almost to the weekend, he returned to Spa and won his first Grand Prix. Within a season, the question was no longer whether he was quick, it was whether anyone alive could live with him. Here is the part that separates him from every fast driver who came before. Speed, in Schumacher's hands, was not a gift. It was a system. He arrived in Formula One fitter than any driver the sport had ever seen, training like an Olympian in a paddock where some of his rivals still smoked. He stayed with his engineers until the data ran out, night after night, race after race, and the debrief became a weapon nobody else knew how to hold. Martin Brundle, his own teammate in 1992, described what it felt like to read this man's telemetry. "Sometimes you look at data," Brundle said, "and you think that guy couldn't drive sheep. Another day you look at it, and it happens to be 1M Schumacher, and you think it is not possible to go that fast through that corner. Not possible." That is the testimony of the man sharing the same car, reading the same traces, and failing to copy them. The system won him 2 world titles at Benetton by the age of 26, and then it produced numbers that still look like typing errors. In 2002, he finished on the podium in every single race of the season. 17 races, 17 podiums. Read that again. 2 years later, he won 13 of the 18 races and took his 7th championship, 3 more titles than any man in the history of the sport had ever held, with 5 of them in a row. When he passed the all-time record for victories, he did not edge past it. He left it 40 wins behind. 68 times he started a Grand Prix from the front of the grid, which means that for a decade, the realistic Saturday ambition of every other champion in the field was second place. Numbers like these should have made him beloved. Instead, they made him feared, and the fear had reasons with dates on them. Adelaide, November 1994. Schumacher led Damon Hill by a single point in the final race of the year, in the season that had already broken the sport's heart. He ran wide, clipped the wall, and his wounded car came back across the road as Hill turned in to pass. Both cars were out on the spot, and the title was his first, decided in a shower of carbon fiber. Patrick Head, technical director of Hill's team, said Williams was already 100% certain that Michael was guilty of foul play. On the world broadcast, Murray Walker allowed that many would call it a desperate maneuver to stop Damon Hill winning the championship. Hill himself, years later, stopped being diplomatic about it. Schumacher called it a racing incident and kept the crown. 3 years later, at Jerez, the sport ran out of patience. Fighting Jacques Villeneuve for another title, 1 point ahead again, he turned his Ferrari into the side of the Canadian's car as it swept past for the lead. This time he came off worse, beached in the gravel while Villeneuve drove on to the championship. And the governing body did something it had never done to any driver before. and has never done to any driver since. It erased him. Second place in the World Championship deleted from the record books, his wins left standing like evidence at a trial. Deliberate, the FIA ruled but not premeditated, and they sent the greatest driver alive to spend 7 days teaching road safety like a schoolboy serving detention. It had looked like desperation. The stewards ruled it a decision. To understand why the paddock never once relaxed around this man, 3 afternoons are enough. The first is Barcelona, June of 1996. In a downpour. His Ferrari was, on merit, the third best car in the field on a dry day, and this was very far from a dry day. He nearly stalled at the start and fell to 6th, buried in the spray of the cars he was supposed to lose to. Then the lap times began arriving, and they did not make sense. 4 seconds faster than anyone else on the circuit, 5 seconds on some laps. Seconds, not tenths, in machinery that had no right to them. He picked off the leaders as if they had chosen different weather, passed Villeneuve for the lead before a quarter of the race was gone, and won by more than 45 seconds, Ferrari's first victory of his era, with only 2 other cars left on the lead lap. They called him the Rainmaster after that afternoon, and nobody, in 30 years, has taken the name away. The second is Spa, August 1998, the storm from our opening. Leading by half a minute in fog and blinding spray, he closed to lap David Coulthard's McLaren, and Coulthard, unsighted and unhappy, lifted off the throttle without leaving the racing line. The Ferrari ran into the back of him at full speed and came home on 3 wheels. What happened next frightened the paddock more than the crash itself. Schumacher climbed out, marched the length of the pit lane with his eyes fixed, shook off his own mechanics as they grabbed for his shoulders, and confronted Coulthard in the McLaren garage, shouting that he had tried to kill him. The most controlled man in the sport, fully out of control, is a sight nobody who stood there has ever forgotten. The third is Austria, May 2002. Ferrari ordered Rubens Barrichello to hand over a race he had led all afternoon, and Barrichello obeyed 100 meters before the finish line, in front of the whole world. The crowd booed the podium ceremony from the first step to the last. Schumacher, visibly embarrassed, pushed Rubens onto the top step and handed him the winner's trophy, and the governing body fined the team $1 million for it. Within a year, team orders were banned across Formula One. Read the sequence properly. They had to change the rules of the sport around him. Again. Now listen to the men who knew the machine from the inside, because their testimony is the spine of this story. Ross Brawn, the technical director behind all 7 of his championships, at Benetton and then at Ferrari, was asked late in his life where Schumacher stands among the greats of 100 years of racing. "There is nothing above Michael," he said. Nothing. And Braun, an engineer to his bones, explained it like an engineer. You never question anything in terms of driver performance. The talent was enormous, the physical condition exceptional, the power of concentration and the commitment without parallel in his experience. Eddie Irvine, his Ferrari teammate for 3 seasons and nobody's flatterer, settled it early and out loud. The greatest driver of all time, he said, and admitted that deciding this on day 1 was the only way to keep his sanity in the same team. Johnny Herbert learned the same lesson from the other side. In 1995, after out-qualifying Schumacher exactly once, Herbert found himself barred from seeing his teammates' telemetry, locked out of the numbers inside his own garage. It was not easy, Herbert said, with all the understatement in England, to drive with him in the same team. Every teammate arrived believing he could be measured. Every one of them left telling the same story. Notice what the witnesses keep describing, not a rival. A fortress with a single gate and the key held on the inside. But the silence is already waiting, 11 years ahead. Because twice, and only twice, the world watched the fortress crack. The first crack was Monza, September of 2000. Schumacher won the Italian Grand Prix in front of Ferrari's own crowd, a sea of red flags that had waited 21 years for a champion and reached 41 career victories, the exact total of Ayrton Senna, the man who had been killed leading the race. Schumacher went on to win at Imola in 1994, the season that made his first title feel haunted. In the press conference afterwards, a reporter mentioned the number out loud. Schumacher tried to answer, and the words did not come. The most mechanical champion the sport had ever produced dropped his head and wept in front of the cameras of the world, and it was Mika Häkkinen, the rival who fought him hardest, who put an arm around his shoulders and quietly asked the room for a break. "I was up on the podium looking at all those people," Schumacher said later, "and I was coming back to the memories of Senna, and it was a strange mixture of feelings. Nobody had ever seen it before. Nobody ever saw it again. The second crack did not happen at a racetrack, and that is the cruelty the sport has never made peace with. On the 29th of December 2013, on a family skiing holiday above Maribel in the French Alps, Michael Schumacher crossed off the groomed run, struck a hidden rock, and was thrown headfirst onto another. His helmet split in two, and the investigators later confirmed he had not even been going fast. He had survived 308 Grand Prix, Spa in the fog, Monaco in the rain, an era that buried its drivers and expected the survivors to shrug, and the blow that stopped him came on a quiet mountain, on vacation, at little more than walking pace. He was airlifted off the mountain to a trauma unit in Grenoble, and the sport held its breath outside the doors. Since that morning, his wife Corinna and his children have guarded his privacy absolutely. The updates stopped, the gates stayed closed. What the world knows now is only what the family chooses, and the loudest career in the history of motor racing became its most protected silence. The sport has respected that silence for more than a decade now. It never managed to beat him any other way. So the question this story opened with can finally be answered. The men who raced Michael Schumacher were never afraid of his speed. Speed they understood, they had speed of their own. What frightened them was a man with no off switch anywhere in the system. A man who converted every hour, every rule, every teammate, and every gray area into winning, who could not be bluffed, could not be tired out, and could not be talked down, because behind the commitment there was nothing waiting except more commitment. Senna terrified the grid with transcendence, with laps that seemed to come from somewhere else. Schumacher terrified it with totality because nothing came from somewhere else. All of it was built, hour by hour, on purpose. 7 titles, 91 wins, 5 championships in a row, and 1 erased season all say the same short sentence. He did not know how to stop. And the cruelest turn in the whole story is that the sport never got to watch him choose to. If stories like this one deserve to be told properly, subscribe and follow along, because there is a new legend of the grid here every week, told from the record and from the mouths of the men who were there. And leave a comment with the one Schumacher race you will never forget, because those comments decide which legend this channel covers next. Somewhere in the Alps, guarded by the people who love him, the benchmark keeps its silence and the whole sport is still chasing it.